My name is Heather Murray Elkins, and I welcome you to a time of holy human stuff. This is the first of what will be 3 YouTubes that could be labeled Purple Prose, because all 3 will address the importance and the role and the meaning of the color purple. I want to begin first with clothing. It is a way to begin. If you look at, in fact, the account of the first clothing that humans had anything to do with, it's from the book of Genesis. And God is, in fact, the first fashion designer, if you will. He clothed, she clothed the human beings. And it is important to recognize that for as long as human beings have had culture, clothing is one of the oldest of artifacts. And what we can learn is that we, humans, have been into clothes for a long time. So fashion is a way to not only read things like origin and status, it is also a clear illustration and expression of personality. And in fact, in almost every culture, a human being that refuses to wear clothes is considered deviant or socially out of order. So some clothing is always seen as part of what it means to be civilized, cultured, into a particular community. Well, I want to talk about a particular community today under the name of a woman who had something to do with clothing and the gospel. And her name was Lydia. And we discover Lydia if we look at the book of Acts. It's in the 16th chapter. And it begins in the 14th verse. Now, Paul and his friends are in the middle of Asia Minor, and they're coming to the area. She meets him first in what we call Philippi. But here's the reading and the description. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. When she and her household were baptized, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home." And she prevailed upon us. So Luke and Paul and those who were on this early mission encounter this woman named Lydia. And what we discover is she is someone who is in fashion design of that age. And what we also know, because it is the color purple, that the cloth that she is engaged in marketing and selling is for those who are royalty or those who are very, very wealthy. And the reasons we know that has to do with, in fact, the origins of the color purple. It is not a color that happens naturally. We don't see it in some of the other ways. Other colors, like ochre, were discovered and used. This color, in fact, required fishermen from the city of Tyre, and this can be dated back into early in that history of that port, that city, clear into the Bronze Age. They discovered by fishing deep waters that they could pull up a certain kind of shellfish. And when the glands of that shellfish were crushed and then mixed with other ingredients, behold, the color purple. And it was called Tyrian purple. And it became famous throughout that portion of the world. It was so rare, and the secrets for making it were so guarded that it would be considered the luxury item of the age. In fact, pound for pound, a pound of dyed wool in purple would cost you a pound of gold. So this color was restricted, obviously, to those who wore it and could afford it. And by the time the Roman Empire establishes itself, it begins to be associated with the emperor. And then there were some regulations on who could wear purple and who could not. But back to the gospel story. So this is a woman of means. There are those who say she was a widow, but there's no evidence in the text that she was other than what it says. A woman who was very good at business, who knew how to both run a business and a household, and she becomes the first one to welcome and in fact form a house church in that part of Asia Minor, which is now a part of Turkey. So that encounter between the color purple and a woman whose name, Lydia, is both perhaps her name and the place she came from, and the encounter of the gospel is woven as deep into the fabric of the New Testament as we can get. This woman and this color. Now, you might ask, when it comes to clothing, why do we dress in purple during Lent? Why purple? Partly because it was associated through the Roman Empire with royalty, with the role of Caesar. And so what better color could the Christians borrow than to say, Christ is the Lord? So that color. And then, of course, it became adopted by those who were in the service of the church. And it wasn't until approximately the middle of the 1400s that the Pope ordered, okay, enough purple, you're going to wear red from now on. So it was a very popular color as the church and the empire, Christendom, joined hands. It still remains the color of Lent for royalty, for suffering. And you said the source of suffering, it is associated with Christ, but because in almost all the YouTubes we do together, I have some section that refers to other creatures besides humans. There were so many of these shellfish caught and killed for their color that mountains were formed of their shells, and they almost went into extinction. So there was a suffering also of the innocents to make this color. But I want to show you a particular vestment of purple that came to me as a gift. It is quite royal. It is, in fact, a chasuble. It means little house. And it came to me through the gifts of a priest who shared some of the joint services that we had in this one small town where I had an early appointment, early ministry. And we would have these joint services. And he would wear his beautiful stoles, and I would wear a chasuble that my people had made for me. And he said that he appreciated being with someone who understood that sacramental tradition. But I have to admit that we were frequently critiqued by the other pastors. And in fact, at one point, a pastor who definitely did not wear any kind of vestments beyond a really good suit said, "Oh, here come those two who are too good for regular clothes." So Father Hughes looks at me and I look at him, and we're both attired to celebrate the gospel in community with others. I just shrugged. But he took it to heart, and shortly after that service, he called and he said, "I notice you wear chasubles." I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I have a few. I'll send them over." So, in 20 minutes, on my doorstep, delivered by a member we both shared, were 4 extraordinary vestments. This is one. And I looked at them, and I looked at the label, and it says, "Made in France exclusively for La Rochelle." This is silk, velvet. These are extraordinarily expensive. This is something that the royalty of clergy or very large churches with a really big endowment can purchase. Certainly not a little Methodist church on the side road. So I called him back and I said, "Father Hughes, you can't give me these. These are too expensive." "Oh," he said, "I don't wear them. If you notice, I wear a woven stole from Guatemala." And he said, "If you notice, they're backwards now." I said, "Backwards? Allow me to show you." You see, this used to be the front of a chasuble if you are a Roman Catholic priest. Quite beautiful. But this is the front before Vatican II. And then after Vatican II, it changed. What changed was not the robe, but where people were to be seated. The presider was no longer with his back to the people. The presider was to face the people. And what happened was, what was on the back used to be the way the gospel was proclaimed. But now, it was backwards. Allow me to show you. This was the face. This was the royal face of Christ, the suffering one, that used to face the people. But with Vatican II, with changing where the altar was, where the presider stood, I understood what he meant. They were outdated. He couldn't wear them anymore. And he wanted to gift them to me. Well, I thought about it for a moment, looking at these, thinking how beautiful they were, and how, for him now, they were backward, and he said they were far too fancy for his form of ministry. And so I agreed to receive the gift. And then he had a parting blessing for them. He said, "Do you know, I really want you to have these, because when the priest that made this poor little parish buy these all those years ago, spend really good money for something that really wasn't as important. When that priest discovers that a woman is wearing these, a clergy woman is wearing these, they'll have to put him back in purgatory." And we both laughed, and I trust it wasn't true. But when it comes to the color purple, sometimes you have to wear tradition backwards in order to get it right.